that some folks will have to maybe jump out maybe at after an hour, but we'll go for an hour and a half, and you'll get to some of the main ideas, I think, in the first hour or so. Um, so yeah, so this actually, Nancy mentioned my new book, but actually I'm working on a new book, so that's confusing to me. But this is my new book is about reading. This one is about writing, and so I'm trying to pair these two things together over the course of a couple of books. Um, so, anyways, yes, this book came out last year, and I've been sharing these ideas with faculty and getting good feedback on the ideas and having them continue to develop and grow for me, and then try to share those ideas going forward with people as they engage with the material and use it to engage in new kinds of writing and reaching new kinds of audiences. So I'm gonna the way this sort of will work is there's a Google Doc that you can link to in the chat. That Google Doc we'll use for an activity in just a few minutes. It also has a link to the slides if you want to follow the slides along. I'm going to show the slides. So my recommendation is if you don't need to do that, just follow along and then just but you have them available to you afterwards as well. So I'll leave the doc and the slides available to you afterwards. You can come back to that as you need to. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here and get ourselves started. All right, and yes, and by all means, feel free to put questions in the chat. You can also just unmute yourself and yell at me, and that's fine too. I'm happy to chat with folks, answer questions along the way. So the premise of the book and the workshop itself is to write like we teach, and the idea is to think about how when we are engaged in writing nonfiction work, whether that's for people in our disciplines or outside of our disciplines, we're helping people learn things. And that's the core idea. If we put ourselves in that mindset, it can help us do a better job of shaping our writing practices in support of the main goal, to help people learn something. So, the idea is to embrace what we do well as teachers, to sort of notice the things that we do in the classroom, the ways we design our courses, the ways we even talk to students or share evidence practices, or whatever we think is important when we do in the classroom. How will we engage in those kinds of practices on the page? So, and there's a couple I think one, right like we teach is the main thing here, but I do think it's important to note too the paramount the importance of audiences, to reach our intended audiences. And this particular book is designed to help people move beyond just the audiences of their disciplinary colleagues. So moving beyond just the specialists in your field. So, which is not to say that that kind of writing for your specialists in your field is not important. It is. It's essential, and I believe it's essential work for us as scholars and for the world at large. But, my focus in this work is how do you go beyond that and start to help other people understand the importance of what you do and your research? So, again, all this sort of lays on top of this premise, right? We are people who create learning experiences for other humans. And so the idea is that if we think about the student in your classroom came there to learn something from you, okay, now think about that same person who's picked up something that you've written, and likewise, they're there to learn something. And so what would it look like for you to put yourself in that mindset of crossing from one context to the other? And that's really the whole premise of how this works. I do really kind of believe that once you get that mindset, in your head, you can start seeing these things play out on your own and start to notice things that you do in the classroom that might have a kind of crossover translation possibilities for your writing as well. So I always, like to give you some models of that, what that looks like, a couple areas, but then also I want you to just going forward from here, notice when you're writing, when you're in the classroom, what would cross from one context to the other that will help students learn or that your readers will learn from. Okay, the example I always like to give, the easiest one for people to understand is attention. And I wrote a book about attention, so this is always in my mind. But the idea of like a learner's attention in the classroom, you see on the left, the stuff on the left side there. When we're in the classroom, we know we have to support people's attention. We can't just lecture for 75 minutes without a break, without having to just sit there taking notes for 75 minutes, especially now, right? That's more challenging now. And so, what we do, we sort of, we'll talk for 20 minutes and we take a break, have them do a think, pair, share, or we have them ask a question to us. Or we do 20 minutes of lecturing, then some, group work, or we show a video or something like that. Or, one of the things that we often will do is we'll show like an agenda, an outline of what the material looks like. And that outline is good for attention as well. And, one thing you'll see me doing throughout this entire presentation is highlighting keywords, phrases, and ideas on the slides themselves. So if I go backward, actually, you'll see it right there, right? So I'm not just showing you a body of text here. I'm saying, yes, here's there's a thesis here, but I want you to notice the most important part here, right? Like we did, right? So you'll see me doing this throughout the presentation. And, many of us do this in the slides that we create for students in the classroom. Okay, so how does that translate? Well, in a piece of writing, I could probably grab any book on my shelf right here and to sort of point out to you, most books will have 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, and then they'll have some kind of section break, italicized subheadings or bold subheadings, whatever it might be. So even like articles in the Chronicle of Higher Education or Inside Higher Ed, you'll notice these, oftentimes are being broken up over the course of even just several paragraphs. There'll be an opportunity for the reader to kind of stop, reorient, and move through the next section of the piece of writing. So signposting, it just means like, I'm going to talk about these 3 things. Here's first, here's 2, here's number 3. Sparing use of bolding or italicizing. The same that I'm doing here, you can do it, and you'll see this in writing as well, right? Also, varying sentence and paragraph length. Having just this sort of block after block of paragraph, for example, a scholarly work, right? That can be hard for attention. But sometimes you can like pull out a great phrase or a single sentence, which is maybe even 3 words long, that will catch the reader's attention and help them say, oh, that's important. And then they're sort of, again, they're reoriented before they go forward into the next part of the writing. So it's an example of what I mean by thinking about what goes in your classroom, what goes on there, and then how would that maybe translate into your writing practices. Now, that's just a really quick example of that. But, and I always try to make the case to people also, this is the work that we do is important. And I think it's really important for us to not just let journalists, for example, do that work for us, especially now. I think, our current climate, political climate, where a lot of times expertise is being called into question. How can we then make sure that we are becoming the direct line to the public about the important research that we do? My daughter was getting a master's degree in nutrition at Tufts University, and she's in nutrition and public health. So I'm kind of now much more aware of these kinds of things you see like in social media, how much, 50 grams in every meal. And this kind of thing drives her crazy, right? Because, this kind of misinformation is just sort of, it's out there. And certainly we can rely on, journalists to do this work for us and come into our spaces and bring the stuff out. But we can do that work as well. We're capable of doing that because we are teachers and we help people learn. And so I think we can sort of embrace that role, not only in the classroom, but beyond the classroom as well. And I think the other reason I try to make this case to people is if you look at what people expect out of higher education, look at the first one, right? Connecting research into science, technology, and how things work. So 79% of the public thinks this is an important thing that we do, but go down to the 4th one, developed a well-formed citizenry. And so this comes from 2024, I think. These ideas of people expect this from us. But we traditionally have not been great at that sometimes. So how do we make sure that we are being that pipeline from the important work that we do to the public through some of these ways that we can write about our research, our ideas, our experiences. So, big picture here about the work mattering, right? I think actually there's two things that are happening right now, sort of diminish the value of our work. We have the sort of human stuff going on in the political world, questioning expertise, um, but also AI is obviously having a role in this as well. So, right, so this idea that sort of automated voices, AI, can come in now and sort of overtake or replace or substitute for what we do, that means it's even more important for us now to show people the value of learning from humans. How do we want to learn from experts who have experiences like they do, who care about the things they care about, and then it can be the sort of the translator from the deep questions that we investigate into the things that they care about. Okay, so here's how things will work. Speaking of agendas, we're doing a little open activity here in just a minute here. And I'm going to invite you to think about this now. I'll give you the mindset to move back and forth between writing and teaching. I'm going to ask you to read something very quickly and put a comment on it in the Google Doc. Number two, stirring curiosity. And this to me is a big one. And I'll explain what I mean by that and what that looks like in writing and give you some examples or models of that in writing. And finally, what I call being good company. What kind of, if you're a teacher on the page, what kind of teacher are you? Is the kind of teacher that just stands up in front of behind the podium in a big auditorium, lecturing the entire time? Or are you someone that's willing to come in the room? Are you like a teacher that's willing to talk to the students where they are? Again, be aware of the limitations as learners, attention, all that kind of stuff. And I always like to leave a little time at the end for just about publishing questions. So if you're interested in doing this kind of work, this kind of crossover work, public intellectual work, people usually have questions about how do you get that done on a very logistical way. So I'll make sure that we have a little time at the end of the session for those kinds of questions. So you have those, please, Bob, share them with me, and I'm happy to share my perspective on those things. So the Google Doc is in the chat. And there will be a sort of brief writing activity. I think we'll get that in before people have to leave, if they have to leave at the end of the hour, before we do the part 3 and 4. And you can actually, when we do that writing activity, you can write there, or just do it on your own, in your own piece of, your device or whatever it might be. I've noticed in the past when I've done this, people prefer not to write there. That's fine, but it's available for you if you want to write there. And you're always interrupt with questions, comments, clarifications, and so that's how things are going to go. Okay, so here's how we're going to start. The McClintock letters are an initiative. I think they were started in I'm losing track right now. It might be Cornell, which were designed to help academics reach public audiences through op-eds. And so this particular institute helps academics find connections to editors in public newspapers and to write about the importance of science in particular. The McClintock letters typically focus on science. And you can see on the map here of all the places where there's been 200 letters now that have been published through this aegis of this institute. She's all over the country, lots of them. And I think you could actually look at the website. It'll show you which ones have been published in your state, and which newspapers they were in. So it's a great initiative, and I think it's worthwhile for us to kind of look at one of those letters and see, okay, where's the education happening here? Where's the teaching happening in one of these letters? And I think that's a way to kind of get ourselves started on this mindset. So I'm going to show you. So I want you to go to the Google Doc, which is in the chat. This is an essay that was published in the Tampa Bay Beacon on federal funding for scientific research. So I invite you now to read the article. It's only 2 pages long, and to use the commenting feature of the Google Doc to show me places where you see this author writing like a good educator to her audience. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a few minutes, let you do that, and then we'll get some ideas from what your comments look like. All right. And Nancy got us started. So keep going, everybody. Few more minutes here. Just like a classroom, we've got several active participation participants and some other folks just looking along, which is fine. Um, okay, so because we're curious to hear some folks tell me, what sort of stood out to them. Hang on, I'm gonna get this share screen here now and get to the document itself. Um, yeah, okay, so um, yeah, let me just see who's saying what here. I'm gonna check all these. Yeah, so Ashley, are you able to speak? I know everyone not be able to speak necessarily.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So tell me why you highlighted that first one.
Um, establishing, I'm thinking specifically about the comment that you had about the kind of company we want to be, right? And writing human to human. So establishing her identity in this like really, really grounded way that I think will resonate with a lot of readers because it evokes our own moments of childhood. Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, the idea that she not only the sort of the fact that she was raised in Florida, but this comment too about like, and I think, Anne, you highlighted this one, very vivid imagery, but also like calling back that sense of childhood wonder, nature. This is a really good way to kind of establish her position as someone who's like their readers, has that same maybe love of nature as a very young child, and then use that to keep moving herself forward into an academic career. So that's really good stuff. And Nancy, you have something on here I want to highlight too. Not taking the readers. Wait, where does that look hooked to? About not taking the readers' knowledge background, foundational info. Where is that? Yeah, there. This one, dedicated to conservation education. I think that's
Yeah.
important too. To go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just not assuming that the reader knows exactly what the National Park Service is or does, so they don't feel stupid if they're not sure. So just providing that little bit of explanation.
Yeah. And in the book itself, I call this invitational prose. And a big part of invitational prose is making sure your reader understands this is not some exclusive party that we're in here, that only I can talk to my people who have, the entry pass. I want to make sure that you understand what I'm talking about, that you have the knowledge that you need to understand my argument. And so this is a great example of that kind of invitational prose that explains something that a regular reader might not know. And so I think that's really important too. Let's see, Sierra, what's Kairos? So tell me about that. Uh, if you can, if you don't mind sharing.
Hi, sorry, I have lots of noisy dogs, so I've
That's
muted.
okay.
Um, so yeah, I would like that's the moment that it kind of pulls the reader in and introduces a threat. So I was just kind of
Yeah,
thinking about the good company aspect, and to me, it was a really good model for doing like for establishing Kairos in a way that has now involved everyone in the room, whether they relate to the personal experiences or whether they relate to the health research, whatever aspect. So yeah, like
yeah,
we're in good company together here.
yeah. What's your background discipline?
Rhetoric.
Yeah,
Um,
okay. So can you explain to people who are not coming back from English or rhetoric what you mean by Kairos? I
Sorry.
assume that. Just, yeah, remind people what Kairos is.
Oh, so Kairos is the moment of it's the opportune moment, right?
Yeah,
So this is the moment to speak. This is why this matters at this time, right? And so time
yeah,
is situated and contextual, and it's that opportune moment, right? Yeah, to speak, right? Or
yeah.
to debate or whatever.
Okay, thank
So
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
Habit.
I come from that background too, so yeah. We're being more invitational pros here as we. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. This is great, everybody. I really appreciate all these comments are great. I just noticed this, Janice here at the end. Call to action, really important too. Paul put this also as well. So this is all great stuff. So I appreciate all these comments. I'm going to just share a couple things for myself that I want you to notice. And some of these overlap with what we already noticed here. Some things I kind of noticed in this article are, first of all, writing as a human. We already talked about this a little bit, but I just love this idea of, the vivid imagery here, as you pointed out. I grew up this way, and I think this is really true because most people, when they're very young, are interested in nature. I've raised all my, I've got 5 kids. They were all loved nature for a little while. Some have stayed, some have not. But this idea, very young children oftentimes had this nostalgia for nature that we might carry into our lives. So when we're reading something like this, oh yeah, I did something like that too. So I think that's a really good thing for her to do. This is a subtle thing, but I think it's really important. She's talking about, she's trying to appeal to her readers. Well, she's in Florida, right? And in Florida, there's a lot of folks who go to retire there, who are elderly, and so most people in Florida and that demographic are going to know people who have cancer, and prostatic cancer in particular is a cancer that oftentimes will affect people as they're getting and later stages of their lives. So this is like a very subtle, but I think it's a really smart thing that she did here, to sort of appeal to the readers to say, listen, this example I'm giving you a basic science contributed to something that probably affects somebody that you know. I think it's really important. And then the learning objective. And so, in the book, I talk about the learning objectives of a piece of any writing that we do. And this is an example of like the learning objective. So our learning objectives can be, I want you to do something. They can also just can be something like, I want you to just know this, or I want you to be more aware of this, or to notice that this has been talked about in the wrong way in the past. So I'm going to show you a different way to think about this. So, but again, like in a classroom too, when students come into your room, you have a learning objective for them. And I think it's useful to think about a piece of writing that same way. What's your learning objective for the reader? And if we had like a longer workshop here, like I was in person there, I'd have you sort of think about your piece of writing and write down your learning objectives, like just like you do on a syllabus. How will your reader be changed by reading your work? Okay, so that's great. So this gives you this notion of, as you go forward now and start reading things in your discipline, or especially even like more public facing things, what do you notice? How could you emulate that stuff? How could that expand your own capacities or challenge you as a writer? Okay. All right. So our first lessons here are, right to learners. Humans like to learn from humans. Expert readers. That should be expert writers, actually. Should embrace their unique perspectives. Sorry about that. Learners, teach to the students in the room. So again, this idea of appealing to your specific audience, I think is essential. So, again, her speaking to the audience of Florida, she was smart about the example that she chose of basic science having an impact on cancer research. And then clarify your learning objectives. So here's kind of where we start. Again, you'll find these lessons in the Google Doc, so you'll be able to take these away on the Google Doc as well. But I think the first three things to think about, how do you position yourself as the teacher? Be aware of the learners that you're writing to, and clarify the objectives that you have for them. Okay, great. So let's, there's two big things I want to talk about today. I'll make sure we get the first one in and do a chance for you to play with these ideas, and we'll do the second one after that piece of writing. So, I'm a big believer that curiosity should drive learning. And it's not just my own personal belief. There's good research that shows that when we are curious, we not only are more motivated to learn, we become more strategic and directed and focused in our learning. And so one of the things I always argue to people is, whether it's in a class or in a piece of writing, how do you develop that kind of curiosity? And, the example I always give of the fact that oftentimes college courses don't take this mindset is if you look like a course overview. This is a course overview of a course on plant nutrition or plant biology, right? And we often comes into like a class by saying, okay, here's what this course is all about. You're going to learn these things, and that's. We have to sort of say these things to people. It has to be part of the class, but it's not really a great way to start a learner into like a journey that's designed to sort of provoke curiosity and learning. And I always like to think about this quote from Dan Willingham about how the fact that when we design classes, and oftentimes we do with our writing as well, we skip the step that comes before the answer. The material that we want students to learn is the answer to a question. The answers on their own are not interesting. So if we know the question, the answer becomes interesting. And I think he makes a really good point here. As teachers, we often get so focused on the answers, we don't surface the questions enough. So to me, that's the first move that we have to make, not only in a classroom or a course design, but also in a piece of writing. What's the question that is driving me, my learner, that drove me into it, and then what drives my learner into it? I'll just show these. These are sort of just two paired, like examples, like two paired course overview. And so the first one is that one from plant biology. This is the one that actually leans into the question. First paragraph of a course. That's what you're reading right here. And I love the way that, James Egan comes out here and just says, I got a fascinating question for you. How do you know this person that you've spent all this time with, the person sitting next to you on the bus, is not an android? How do you know that? And what were the categories that would help you see that? And I just think that's a fascinating way to think about, like, how a teacher comes into learning experiences designed to help students say, "Hey, I don't know actually," right? And then help me understand, right? So that's the idea, is to raise the questions, really surface them, take time with them, and then we start offering the answers. So if you look at some great nonfiction books, who have really put the questions on the surface, you see the questions right there in the titles, right? Robert Sapolsky's book about chronic stress and anxiety, right? Beverly Daniel Tatum's great book, I think it's close to his 25th year now, actually. Came out, I think, in the late 90s or early 2000s. And Lula Miller's book about the taxonomies we use to categorize animals and how those things are really actually more fictional than real. So all these books are kind of like, saying, okay, yeah, this is a fascinating question I have for you. Now let's investigate it together. The author leads and pushes us forward, but they're really digging into that idea of, I wanted to show you a question. That's fascinating. If you look at, actually, oftentimes, headlines or the sort of prompts that people get in more public-facing writing, you'll see this actually quite frequently. Editors love these kinds of headlines, right? The one on the right there is from the Chronicle of Higher Education. And the one on the left there is the New York Times health section. That whole health section is oftentimes titled with these kinds of things, right? And these are questions that are designed to help people look for answers. They're trying to identify the places which people are looking for help, looking ideas, looking for ways to inform themselves, and really surfacing those things right at the top. So raising and answering the questions is, I think, an important way to think about more public-facing writing. So now when I think about, those of us who write from the academic perspective and who are teachers, I really believe that one of the ways we can identify the good questions is to look at our own classrooms, where we are baffled in our classrooms, where our students are baffled. What drove us to teach a course on this, or that drove the discipline to teach a course? This quote comes from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she's describing the fact that right before this, she explained the fact that she had asked her students to give her examples of both positive and negative interactions between humans and the natural world. And so she does this, she throws this question out to her students, and the students, give her a bunch of examples of negative examples of humans destroying the natural world, or the natural world, destroying us with earthquakes and tornadoes and all kinds of stuff. And not a single student offered an example of a positive interaction between humans and nature. And this is what follows. I was stunned. How is it possible in 20 years they can't think of any of these beneficial relationships? And so then she asked this question, and she kind of steps back and says, but how can we actually create a better future if we can't even imagine a better future? And if these students can't imagine a better future, how can I help them move forward to develop that better future? So I love this idea of thinking about the question that our students raise in their discipline, and where they struggle, where they're baffled, and then when we are also baffled by things that happen in our classrooms, and how that could maybe play out into questions that might be useful for us to consider for our writing projects. Here's another example of one that comes from like a research field. This is David Yeager's book, 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. And before this section, he tells us a long story about his grandparents and how they had been sort of, really good in terms of like motivating people in their workplaces where they where they'd worked. And this is kind of that long section finishes with this. I became determined to find the Leonas and Petes of the world. I wanted to study their secrets. And the question that came from that is, how do the best managers, parents, and educators get the most out of young people, pushing them to be the best without crushing their spirits? So this comes from his understanding. Yeah, he explains that he's been looking at this research for his whole career, how to give good feedback, how to motivate young people. And he kind of says, I keep noticing it's just not working out. Our theories are not working out. So instead, I've got to go dig in now and find ways to answer this question on my own. And I'm going to show I'm looking at all these areas to identify possible ways to answer this question. So our questions might come from our classrooms. They might come from our research. So, there's lots of different possibilities here. I also like to push people a little bit here because, we often will like how questions. How questions allow us to sort of show off our expertise. How does this work? How should I do this? How should I understand this? And then we say, oh, well, I'll show you that, right? I have this answer to that. But I would argue it's important to push ourselves a little bit here and say, not only I'm going to offer you something in my writing, how to do this or that, how you should understand this, why this works like that, but also like why? Why do we care about this? Why doesn't it work the way we think it works? What does that tell us about ourselves or the nature of things, whatever it might be? So, the example I'm giving here is from my book, Small Teaching, which Nancy mentioned at the start. And Small Teaching is a practice-oriented book. It gives people, idea of how do you apply learning sciences to your teaching. So it's kind of practice-oriented book. But the book itself actually came from a question that I had that was kind of baffling me. We have all this research about how people learn. Why are people not using it? What's the reason for the gap between the learning science research and actual classroom practice? Why isn't that happening? And so that the idea of Small Teaching sort of was my way to sort of answer that. Here's a way to kind of bridge the gap between that neuroscience, that cognitive psychology, to Monday morning at 10 a.m. And so the idea, again, it was the why question that actually drove me into the conception of the book. But then the book itself is more like answering the how questions along the way. So I think it's worthwhile for us to think about both the how and why questions, the deeper questions. Why questions often don't have easy answers to them. But that's why they're, hard questions for us to, they drive our own research agendas oftentimes. If you let's look back now, finally, at that article I showed you that you looked at on the Florida PhD researcher. There's an unspoken question in that article, and it's in this little phrase here. Basic science may seem like a pointless endeavor. So she really didn't surface the question that much in the article itself. It is in here, and it's right here. The question that she's raising for them is, why should the government fund stuff? Because the article is essentially sort of saying it's important to have government funding for basic research. And she's sort of thinking about what her audience might be thinking about. Why should we do that? Why should my tax dollars go to fund basic science? And so this little phrase here is kind of like encapsulating that. I think maybe if I had been her editor, I might have said, surface that question just a little bit more so your reader can see that. But it's there. And I would argue, I would suggest to you as well, as you go forward in your own, now looking at, nonfiction work, however you're going to, whatever things you read, look for the questions. I already mentioned the idea of looking for, how people are writing like teachers, or how they're getting to their learners, learning objectives, all that kind of stuff. But look at this as well. What are the questions that are behind any piece of writing that you read? And how well are those being surfaced or not being surfaced? Okay. So let's quickly stop here for a second before I give you a little time to play with this idea. And so again, the Google Doc has a writing prompt in it, and a space for this. If you want to sort of think about one of a little bit of drafting with one of your principles in mind, So I want you to think about a project you're working on that you'd like to work on, something you maybe you're in, finishing, whatever it might be, to take 10 minutes with these ideas in mind. And you came here because you wanted to, get some progress in your writing. So make some progress and at least 10 minutes of progress. But that's not useless. So to think about, take one thing we talked about. Maybe write a few sentences about like, your unique connection to the topic. Who's your actual audience? Really define that clearly. What's the learning objective of your piece? Or what are the questions or problems that underlie your argument or idea? Okay. Nancy, are there any questions in chat that I should notice here before?
I don't think so, not that I saw.
Okay, I'm gonna set my timer for 10 minutes, everybody. Um, and I'm gonna start my presentation here and encourage you to take out your pen, your pencil, jump on either doc or doc on your own device and do a little bit of drafting. And you will hear my timer go off. We're at the 5 minute mark, FYI. And we have one brave soul actually writing the document, which I appreciate. Two, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, I see. Okay. Oh, three. Look at you all. All right, one or more two sentences. You're being so productive. I hate to interrupt it. I mean, what's happening in the document is just fantastic. This is great. So all right, that's the timer there. So that's been 10 minutes, and boy, it shows you the power of 10 minutes for some of you. And I also see like it's great to see like the different strategies people took, or like and like some of you are just exploring the research question a little bit further, digging into the questions themselves, but also like telling a story to kind of create that sense of identification with the reader. The romanticy example here, is a good example of like, hey, I'm just like you. I love these books, and try to write to the reader that maybe you have that same kind of interest. So just like lots of good stuff here. Really good. But one thing I want to just highlight here, who's JEP? I'm not sure.
Oh, that's me,
Because
Janice.
Janice, because I want to just notice, I want people to just notice if you're in the doc, you're writing as you're writing, your questions are going deeper. And I think that's what this does for us. And what you really kind of finished here, as you're getting to the end of this, you're writing here, we've had all this stuff, and the needle's not moving. It's like, why? And that to me, like is leading something interesting for you, I think. So, I just want to highlight that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in my discipline, English literature and writing, there's a guy named Peter Elbow. He's a very famous writing theorist. And he, talks the idea about free writing. Free writing is essentially just like, you put your pen to paper and you start writing, and you just don't stop. And if you don't know what to say, you just keep saying, I don't know what to say. The idea is just put pen to paper and just start moving or typing, whatever it might be. And I think what he argues is that, it pushes you through barriers. It helps you like to go further than you would expect. If you just think about it in your brain or try to like make an outline or something. And I can see that happening in your actual writing practices. So I definitely recommend this idea of just sometimes just sit down and set a timer for 10 minutes and see what develops. So thank you. I'm really grateful for your participation in that activity. Okay, I do want to share one other idea. I talked about the idea of being good company, and so I'll take, if folks have to leave, that's no problem. But for those who want to stick around, I'm going to take maybe 10 or 15 minutes more to share one other principle about writing like a teacher, and then open it up for questions and conversations about the whole idea. All right, so I'm going to reshare the slides again. So hang on a sec here. All right, so let's get back over here. Oops, sorry, that was the wrong one. Slideshow. Okay, so again, really good. Thank you for doing that and participating in that process. Okay, so I mentioned the idea of being good company, and this is a big part for me. On the one hand, it's really important to do this, but I think it's also sometimes challenging to do this, especially because we come from our scholarly backgrounds in which we're actually not trained to write like this. In the way that we saw in that Florida piece, and the way that you're writing about our love of romanticides, like whatever it might be, we're not actually trained in that kind of writing. So I oftentimes find academic writers struggling with how much should I share, and like, is that going to make people take me less seriously? Will sort of somehow interfere with their perception of me as a scholar. And so the way I try to think about this is not so much you're sort of sharing a lot of personal stuff. You can do that, but I'm not sure that's necessary or even the right way to think about it. And so what it means for me, this idea of being a good company sort of gets to the heart of what I'm trying to argue here. So I like to give the example of, two things that might be happening on college campus, right? You've got the lecturer over here, the big board, and you see the lecturer is actually facing the board, which oftentimes when we're writing on boards, that happens to us. And so again, there's a lot of information there. And I'm sure if someone who knew that what he was up there, maybe it was useful to you, and you're going to learn something from that experience, but it's very abstract. It's almost like learning from AI, right? In that kind of case over there. And so you can certainly learn from that, but you have to be really motivated to do that. And you have to be an expert already, be sort of motivated to do that. You come in with a question already in your mind. And I want to just push on the right side, on the right picture is a tour guide. And a tour guide is, if you listen to tour guides that go around your campus and talk about, how do they, as new students come in, they're trying to explain the university to them, you'll see what they do. They turn and face the learner. They oftentimes will share little stories about, oh yeah, that's the dorm I lived in, or most of my classes were in this building. They're still sharing a lot of ideas about the campus, but I just like the idea of sort of reorienting ourselves to the learner as a way to think about being good company. A good tour guide is good company to the learners in the group, and likewise, we as writers can have that same level of being good company to our readers. Now, so that's the sort of conception of this, is not so much that like the tour guide is not going to sort of tell them their life history, or like share that the fact that someone in their family is really ill, and they're feeling sad that day. They don't have to do that kind of thing, but they do want to share glimpses of themselves, share their passions, their ideas, and their ways of kind of like how they experienced the campus themselves. So that seems to me like the easy way to think about this for those of us who are writing for public audiences. So here's some ways to think about this. So I'm going to a couple of slides here, a few slides to think about what this might look like. To me, this is a very easy example of this from psychologist Michael Corballis. This book came out from the University of Chicago Press. It's a book I read when I was writing my book about distraction. And the book has these little moments in them, and they're very little, right? So like the idea is not so much. He doesn't tell us a full page of stories about his son learning to play a recorder. It's just one little sentence or two that will sort of, oh yeah, kind of makes an everyday example that most people can sort of identify with, but it also gives me a glimpse of him as a person, right? He's a parent. It all kind of shows me too that here's a guy who likes to learn, right? Because he decided to sort of try to take up a new skill. It kind of makes me as a learner myself want to sort of identify with him as a writer. So look for these moments, right? And a sentence or two can be enough, maybe a paragraph. We don't want to overwhelm the reader with have the reader sort of be dominated by our experiences. But the idea of these little moments of connection between us and the readers are important. I call these glimpses of our humanity and our passions. This is a great example from a book, a biography of Oscar Wilde. I read it last year. And this is the researcher here is talking about being in an archive and looking at a bunch of pictures of Oscar Wilde in America. And they were like these little very unusual pictures of him, like all like caricatures almost. And the researcher says, how do I make a sense of these, right? And then the question then evolved into a quest to try to, understand what Wilde was like when he came to America. The book is about like his tour he took into America. And again, you see, okay, so then what he did, he followed his passion. He went to libraries. He dug into rare books, reading unpublished letters. And so this to me feels like a good thing to think too about as a way to sort of be in good company. I'm someone who's interested in stuff, right? You want to sort of share that impression. I'm curious too. I'm interested. Follow me on this journey and to investigate this question because I'm really passionate about it. And I think again, go back to the classroom. We all know that an enthusiastic teacher who's really passionate about the subject is much better to learn from than someone just sort of stands up there and is teaching the class just because they have to. They've taught it many times before. And it's going back to the same things they've always taught. So we clearly know that. So again, bringing that into our writing is the way to think about, again, that being that good company. And then our empathy. This one comes from a book called The Wandering Mind. It's right over there. Again, another book that I read when actually, these books have the same title. The Wandering Mind, two different titles. Two different books, but the same title. This book is actually about medieval monks. And we think about, medieval monks, they paid attention. And Kreiner points out, no, They struggle with distraction and their attention just like we do. And and but this again, this is like a moment. This is like one paragraph at the start of a chapter, which then goes into medieval monks. But the chapter is about, that sort of how do they sort of seclude themselves from their distractions when they had to do their work. So, but again, I like the idea of the we, right? Kreiner's saying, hey, I get it. It's not just you struggling with your accounts. I'm not up here in my ivory tower, just, being totally focused. No, she feels the same way. I have social media accounts. I try to find ways to get myself away from my phone. So again, whatever the problems that we're addressing, the question that we're addressing, find those places to show empathy where your reader might be experiencing as well. Okay. And I like this example too. Look for these everyday examples. This comes from a book about the Chinese philosopher Mencius. And so actually, it's a larger book about ancient Chinese philosophy, but this one comes from a chapter on Mencius. And again, it's just an easy little thing here, right? Everyday examples of things that might crop up that would help illustrate whatever you're trying to talk to your readers about. And it's very easy for us to identify with this. And we have rituals. I like the fact that the writers sort of dig in a little bit here on, a piggyback ride for the kids at bedtime, a regular Friday day night. So again, it helps us envision ourselves into the reading, as opposed to sort of having this sort of, I guess, barrier between us and the writer. Okay. So that's essentially what I mean by being good company. And so that's sort of if we look back at the Google Doc now, you'll certainly see she's doing a lot of these same things in that book, trying to help a little glimpse of her humanity at the beginning there about her growing up as a child in Florida. The sort of the ladybugs and all that kind of stuff. Again, like every example there. So all the kind of stuff we see in that writing as well. Okay, so actually, that's it for the formal presentation. And I'm at this point either want to just stop for any comments or questions along the way, but I always like to finish with this possibility as well. So if the things you'd like to have us to discuss or me to answer about these features of the publication process, submitting your work, writing query letters, proposals, working with editors, promoting your work, all that kind of stuff. There's a whole last half of the book, which is about this, last quarter of the book about this process. And instead of just giving me a big overview, I like to sort of find out where people are and be happy to help share ideas about these processes. I'll just quickly note too, before I wrap up here, resources I like to recommend. Obviously, I recommend my own book, but also these two other books I think are worthwhile looking at as well. Just for getting your writing out in the world more. Bill Germano's book, Getting It Published, is more focused on writing books, but it's also really good in terms of just understanding how publishing works, working with editors, what's the process like. And he actually, Germano was an editor for many years at the University of Chicago Press, and another, I think, New Directions maybe. And then Helen Sword work I always recommend to academic writers. Really good creative stuff about how to translate our sort of scholarly prose into more accessible prose to more public audiences. Okay, so again, this is available to you. The Google Docs available to you, and so you can continue to use those as after we leave today. We have 20 minutes left, so I'm open at this point. Questions, ideas, comments in response to any of this. Nancy has a question.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, as a matter of fact, I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. I'm thinking about shorter pieces, not books, but, not even the length of a scholarly article, but articles. Yeah. I hear people talking a lot about the conversation, the venue of the conversation. Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you know of other venues like that?
The conversation is a great place to start. I actually recommend it in the book, and I think it's really almost like it's not a, it's its own publication. It's a publication I think does really good stuff. But I also think it's kind of a training ground for those of us who want to sort of make this transition across to more public forms of writing. In the conversation, I've published several things in there myself. I often will pull from there for examples of good public-facing writing, and so I think it's great. Um, they're if you don't know about the conversation, the whole brief is find academics who can write for public audiences and share their research with it. So I definitely recommend it. And my experience with them, written just a couple of things. They're not only they're really, yeah, thank you, Nancy. They're not only good about like giving opportunities to academics, they're very good at the editing process. So if you get a piece accepted by them or they're interested in your piece, they're going to really help you actually develop your ability to do this kind of writing. So I think they're worthwhile working with, no question about it.
Just as an aside, it's interesting. I didn't notice this before. As I look on their homepage at the different articles and headings, they give the author's name and the institution, which I just think is interesting. Yeah.
I think they do it because that's their whole thing is, we want to surface the writing of academics who are experts. So yeah, I think that's part of their whole objective. So I definitely recommend them as a place to start. I think the two places I would always recommend people start are the conversation is one, and the other is for shorter pieces. Your sort of your hometown newspapers, your local newspapers, and they're often looking for this kinds of stuff. The problem is that they get a lot of stuff that is not really suitable, and if you can show them that you can do this kind of writing, they'll welcome it, I think. I often will even suggest like the most local newspaper that you can think of. So like, I can go to the Boston Globe. There's even more. I know my position at Notre Dame is just hybrid, by the way. So I still live in Massachusetts. So I live in Worcester, Massachusetts, and there's a Worcester Telegram and Zet. But it's a good place for someone to start with this kind of work. And just to note, though, the challenge with those is they're very, very short. Newspaper op-eds are like 800 words at most, which is just like nothing. But you can say something in 800 words, and just also notice that those articles have very, very short paragraphs. Your paragraphs need to be like 2 to 3 sentences at most in that kind of piece. So those are my two big things about that. Yes, there's a hand raise.
Yeah, thank you. This was wonderful. This is Rupal Patel. I'm on the Houston campus. So my question was related to some of the other things, and thank you, Dr. Chick. I didn't know this conversation thing existed, so I'll look into that. But things like LinkedIn Learning and Substack and things like that. And one of the things I do is I teach a health policy course, and I was part of our QEP fellowship on thought leadership, and I'm trying to teach my graduate students that are doctoral physical therapy students how to write in terms of health policy issues and things like that. And so, they struggle to find different mediums, and Substack, LinkedIn Learning, like where they can get the message out, a call to action about a policy piece or something like that. So any suggestions related to that and how to get to kind of some of their target audiences?
Yeah, things get more and more complicated as opportunities to publish things online just keep growing. I do think Substack has a place. I have a Substack account myself. I've kind of noticed though that they're more Substack, a place like that has more impact when you already have a following. It's hard to build up a following on a place like Substack or Medium or Ghost, these other platforms, unless you have folks who can sort of jump in and help you amplify it. And there are things you can certainly do when you sort of learn how, and actually within Substack itself, there's like videos how to amplify your work and get more people to subscribe and so I do find it actually a good platform for me. And I just like as a way to keep my writing muscles going. I'm not sure it'd be a great place necessarily to just jump in there and try to um, share your writing to get like a broader audience. Um, LinkedIn Learning, I'm not actually quite so sure about that one. I've less
Well,
familiar
I'm sorry,
with how
not
that
LinkedIn
works.
Learning, just LinkedIn. Sorry, I was thinking
LinkedIn,
about
yeah, sure.
learning LinkedIn. LinkedIn, yeah.
Yeah, I
Like,
mean, again, all
on
these,
LinkedIn, there's a setting now, I think, where
yeah,
it says like even with, I think, AI assisted, what's on your mind and write your
right.
thing and I've never tried it, but I see that setting now. And, I see certainly more posts on LinkedIn that are like thought leadership related posts, and people even put the stuff they wrote on a Substack on LinkedIn in case you're
Right. I
not
do
on
the same thing.
Substack
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I
subscribing.
do that. Yeah.
So just, for impact, if you're trying to reach a broader audience to perhaps take action on something, is that good? Graduate
Yes,
students, most of them have LinkedIn profiles. And so, could this be something that they can use, you know, to build their thought leadership muscle kind of thing?
absolutely. In fact, I'll give you a case study of this. In fact, so it's just before I got on this call, I got a text from someone whose work I got to know through LinkedIn. She was a philosopher, and she was putting stuff about AI. I thought was very thoughtful. Young woman early in her career, and drawing from like Aristotle and virtue ethics to talk about AI. But this is really interesting, actually. And she had very thoughtful, like longer posts. Sorry. And so I followed her, and I started noticing that she had created a Substack account, and then eventually. The book series, we offered a contract to her, and she's writing a book for my book series now. And so this kind of shows you actually, if you can get yourself out there, but be like separate your post a little bit from the crowd by sharing with your expertise, crafting them well. I think you can get yourself out there in that way. But just to notice now, there's like ecology here. So now she's gonna and as I just said the text, she just sent me a text before this to say she just got a new job, direct honors program at her college. So like this whole cascade of stuff came from her LinkedIn, honestly. And so it's quite interesting to see how she was able to sort of amplify her voice through this. But she sends people to her Substack, right? So the LinkedIn posts are kind of started the process, but then she always says, okay, and for more of this idea, then she can link them to that Substack. So you might be thinking about having these things can work together, right? You have some place to put the longer pieces, the thought pieces, the reflections, the analysis, and the LinkedIn is kind of like these briefer versions of that that can draw people in and create your kind of thought leadership as you're putting it here. So, if you really want to be a thought leader, I think you probably you have to hit like all multiple areas. Um, and as this woman is doing, she'll have a book as well. And in the future, when she goes to her LinkedIn post, they're going to put back to her book, right? So, like, think about the whole ecology. I think that's the approach I would sort of take. Not just don't lock into just social media, especially for those of us who are like academics. Um, you know, if I see someone's on social media, I'm also going to make sure, do they also do the work like of like the research? Do they have expertise? Do they write other things as well? And I knew that Lily had actually, I saw had other thing as well that she had written in for scholarly journals too. So the first time I saw these posts, I thought, huh, who's this? A little research, and okay, yeah, this is a real philosopher who does work in that field as well. So, anyways, being able to sort of have multiple things to me seems the way to go. Social media, some kind of platform, and like the more scholarly stuff as well. What else? I'm I haven't looked at the chat at all.
Lots
Okay.
of gratitude. And then I had just posted, I really like this idea of an ecology, thinking about
Yeah.
kind of an ecosystem of sharing publicly. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's worth one thing is worth thinking about there as well. Also, is like how you're going to make sure you're going to spend your precious writing time and energy. And so that I do see sometimes people struggling with that a little bit. Because the easiest thing to do is social media. That's the shortest and quickest thing you can do, and that can be satisfying enough. Um, but the ecology has to have balance to it,
Mhm.
and so it's worthwhile thinking about our how we making sure that we have um, the substantial stuff as well as the briefer things that happen as well.
There's also just in the chat, I can't remember if I told you this, but our QEP, our accreditation initiative is called Amplify Your Impact. It's all about
Oh,
public communication, teaching public communication, and so there are kind of references in there to how some of those folks can help, and we have some programming, and we even have a public scholarship specialist, and yeah, so
oh
lots
yeah.
of
You
interest
don't
in
need
this.
me. You got plenty of resources.
Oh no, no, we need as much as we can get. This is all great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments before we let everyone get on with their afternoons?
Oh, that's good. Good to know. Got a good comment there in the chat.
Mhm.
Thank
Well,
you, Gretchen.
thanks everyone for coming. I have recorded this. We have his Google Doc. Just as an FYI, the link to the slides, I don't think it works, just so you know. So
Okay.
we can
I'll
fix that.
finish that right now. I'll do that
Yep.
right now. Sorry.
Yep. But thanks everyone for coming. Hope to see you soon. And yeah, have a great
Thank you.
afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks everyone for
Bye,
coming.
everybody.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank
I appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you,
It's hard to know
Nancy.
how many questions there are going to be at the end of these things, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
good. That's good.
All right. It's
Okay.
good to see you again. Yeah.
You
And
too.
yeah, and I'm sure we'll catch up at some point.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon and get that light bulb worked on.
Yeah, I know. See you.
Okay.